Hey, folks, I am Rebecca of Blonde in the Belly of the Beast, and I would like to welcome my guest, Diane Yap, to my channel. Diane's Twitter is just absolutely fire. Her links are below. She has this very aptly named Substack, Critical Rice Theory. It's fascinating. It's well researched. It's a joy to read. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Oh, of course. People on Twitter have just been going crazy. Like every day I get a message like, when is Diane Yap me to come on your channel? And I got some super chats. You have to ask her what's yappening. I'm like, I'm sure somebody asks her that every day. She wakes up and people are like, what's yappening? And we all think we're so clever. So
I've
what's
actually
yappening?
never gotten that before. I
What?
like it. It's kind of funny.
That's good to hear. Let's jump right in. So I heard you call yourself an amoeba, and I think you were saying it in a somewhat derogatory way, in that you were inert until you respond to your environment. And I was thinking about this earlier today. I don't think this is a negative quality at all. I think that largely this is the way people should be immersed in their own lives and their interests and families. Until something disrupts that sphere, that's the only way society works. So, what compelled you to create your platforms and to be so brutally honest in the face of backlash? The amount of backlash you get on Twitter, girl.
I think like what really started it off was it was during the pandemic. They decided to make my high school, which had been a screen school with you had to submit grades and tests. They decided to make that a lottery, and obviously that's not going to result in a great quality of school, as
Yeah.
we saw
Yeah.
subsequently. And that just enraged me. And one of my friends started a nonprofit to fight back against that and asked me to join his board. So I did that. And from there, it just turned into general research about both the topic of education, and then also there was um, all the violence, random attacks against Asians happening in the streets just like every other day. You would hear about somebody who was waiting for the bus and got stabbed, or somebody was walking down the street on his morning walk and got shoved to his death. And then I heard these stats come out in the mainstream media like, oh, 75% of violent attacks on Asians are white people. And I was like, that doesn't make any kind of sense at all, because everybody has a cell phone. So you would
Mhm.
at least see at least as many videos of white people attacking Asians, right?
Of
If
course.
that
Yeah.
were the
Yep.
truth. Like
Yep.
there are, CCTVs, Ring cameras, cell phones everywhere. So you would see a lot more of these on video if it were in fact true. So
Of
I
course.
dig into that and started a blog, and here we
Yeah,
are.
so check out her Substack. She has, I think you have a few articles about this, but in the one that I read last night, you break down some of the data produced by the left, and of course you excoriate their methodology, which was intentionally bad. It was hate crime incidences, and so
Oh
they
yeah.
included all sorts of stuff that was not criminal. I think that several of Donald Trump's 50 of Donald Trump's tweets were included in this,
Yeah.
something like that, some astronomical number. Can you talk a little bit about their intent and the methodological biases in these studies?
Yeah, so the main one that was quoted a lot by the media was done in 2020, and it was called the Virulent Hate Project. They looked at about 1,000, a little over 1,000 incidents that were reported in the news. So they actually scraped news articles to find anti-Asian incidents, so they'll call them,
But
because
there's already selection bias in that because they're getting
exactly,
it from
exactly. And so they looked through the media, and then additionally, they uh, they only included the racial breakdown for those incidents for which race was identified of the perpetrator, right? So again, that reflects media bias more than anything, because as anyone will tell you, it's pretty clear that if the perpetrator was white, that is much more likely to be
to be
mentioned and
reported.
also
Yeah.
sooner in each article. And
Mhm.
that if the perpetrator was black, that's much more likely to just never be mentioned at all, because they don't want to perpetuate stereotypes or whatever, right? So it turned out that in that study, there were a total of just 16 um, anti-Asian incidents that had a physical component. So not even necessarily violence, but just maybe like throwing something or
Or
spitting
spitting,
or
yeah.
something like that, right? So you're not even necessarily looking at somebody who's, been stabbed.
Right.
It could just be that, somebody threw I don't know, a newspaper at them or something.
Yeah.
So only 16 incidents had the race of the perpetrator identified. And of those 16, 12 perpetrators were white. So that's where that figure comes from. Now, compare that to the number of political statements where the race of the perpetrator was identified. That was like over 100,
Mhm.
like 170, I believe it is. I can pull it up, but
You
it was
notice that they don't scour police reports.
right,
Yeah.
right. So, that was sort of a convenient thing that they did. They just said anti-Asian
Mhm.
incidents, um, or attacks. And I guess, I mean, in a way, you could think of it as an attack, of a verbal attack or a throwing attack or something like that. But I mean, I guess that's what I tried to make clear in my article, was that they're doing this little hat trick where
Mhm.
they conflate anti-Asian incidents with actual violence. But
Right.
if you look at the FBI statistics on actual violence, it is not, white people, even without per capita calculations, are not responsible for the largest proportion of the largest amount of anti-Asian violent attacks.
I feel fairly confident that you understand per capita.
Yeah, I hope so, because because I am the Sisyphus of per capita after all.
You said in your Substack that the Chinese hate ma fan. Am I saying this correctly?
Ma fan, so
Oh,
close.
so no, not even
It's
close at
it's
all.
it's tonal, so it's hard if you've never spoken a tonal language. I
Um,
understand. Yeah,
I just can't do.
"Mafan" basically means just like trouble or hassle, or
Yeah.
I mean, they just don't wanna be involved in any unnecessary, just annoyances, if that
Right,
makes
right,
sense, right? So if you can live your life bypassing these annoyances, then the Chinese in general prefer to do that. I think
well,
everyone should, but
everybody does. Yeah, that's the way
yeah.
to be. But, this partially explains Chinese self-segregation from Blacks, but, like, my Chinese friends, majority of them openly racist, highly well, not racist in the colloquial sense. I don't actually
Mhm,
think that they're
mhm.
racist. But they're highly pragmatic about racial differences. Which do you think is the bigger factor, their innate race realism or just not wanting to have to deal with all of this Black riffraff?
Yeah, I can't speak for all Chinese people, I guess, but
Sure
at
you
least
can, it's fine.
for my family, at least, it's definitely more of the "mafan" kind of thing. I mean,
Yeah.
it's basically some pattern recognition. It isn't even that anyone sort of thought that deeply about, racial group differences and, violent tendencies or self-control or anything like that. It's not that they're not going that deep. They're not, reading up on the papers behind all of that. It is just in their life what they've observed, what they've heard from friends, what they've seen on the news, police reports that get out once in a while, and they see a pattern. They
Yeah.
see, like, okay, well, maybe not every Black person is violently attacking Asians, but of all of the incidents that they've seen recently, where an old Asian person's walking down the street and out of nowhere somebody just punches them in the face,
Mhm.
100% of those incidents have been Black people doing it.
Yeah.
So they're
Yep.
like, "Well, maybe I'm just gonna avoid them because I don't really wanna be punched in the face, and I don't know which one of them would and which one of them wouldn't."
Wouldn't,
They
right.
don't wear labels or hats. So all
Yeah.
that I know is that I would rather avoid being punched in the face. That's literally all I
It's not just in America, though. This story got massively memory hold. It was about 8 years ago, but in China, there's so few Black people in China, but there was a university, where they did take, like, 30 African exchange students, which is very uncharacteristic of Chinese schools. But, the guys came in and they started, like, banging the Chinese women. So the Chinese men marched a few of these exchange students up the tower, and they literally threw them off the tower.
Whoa.
So I read
I'm not
about
sure
this.
about that. That's crazy.
I read about this in, like, one my brother had sent it to me or something like that. This was 8 to 10 years ago, in one publication from China or something like that. And then I never was able to find out any information about it ever again. But a few years later, I was doing research for a video, about, the clip, "It's all so tiresome," like,
Mhm, mhm.
about that documentary and how the Chinese feel about Black people, and I read that there are virtually no Black people in China outside of this region, Guangdong, and there are hardly any Black people there. So, like, they're serious about not letting Black people in, and they'll treat you badly. They really will.
I didn't even know any of this. That's fascinating.
Well, I mean, it's good. It's people rag on the Chinese a lot for, all the reasons, communism and everything like that. But like the sense of unity and homogeneity, racial homogeneity, it does lend to some sort of allegiance that we completely lack in the United States. And in that way, the Chinese are going to be far more protected than we are. Um, so I wanted to get back to this agency in the Black community thing, because this is a fascinating topic. But you've written about responsibility and agency within the Black community. You were talking, this was in an article about this Daryl character who I'm not familiar with, but you said, in the end, I think the most damning part of this whole discussion is the way that the author uses the passive voice. Things are done to the Black community. They have no agency. In a more recent article, he also said San Francisco's educational system is producing a generation of Black San Franciscans destined to fail before they even get started. So, if agency and responsibility are negatively correlated, which they should be, obviously, doesn't it stand to reason that Blacks who bear virtually no responsibility for anything in society, including their own behavior because of systemic racism and white supremacy, all of the things, slavery, that they actually do not have agency?
Well, I mean, if that is
It's a trap, Diane. It's a trap.
no, but if that's actually what people want to conclude, and that seems to be the case, that's the problem when you take away any sense of responsibility from the individual and you say that you've just been raised in this system that is forever set against you, that holds you back no matter what you do, that your path is sort of predetermined. If you want to make that claim, then you also have to believe that these people aren't really fully human either. And so,
Yes.
I mean, if you want to make that claim, that's on you. You're
Yeah.
saying that these people are not capable of taking the reins in their own lives. They're not capable of making a better choice. And so that actually ends up pointing at policies that I believe you would like even less. It ends up
Who
pointing
is
towards
you? Are you talking about the collective you or
the collective you, the collective you, or especially leftists. They're not going to like the policy.
No, no,
If,
indeed.
in fact, we do have an entire group of people who simply cannot control their violent urges, who cannot be made to go to school, who cannot be productive because they are so damaged by history, then the only answer is that we need fewer such people, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah,
Which
yeah.
naturally leads us down the path to eugenics,
Yeah,
right? And
but
of course,
what
leftists
do
aren't gonna
you
like
think, Diane? What do you
what?
think? What do you think
About what?
about
I
whether or
I
not
believe that there's always a choice. I believe that
Mm,
everybody has the ability to make better choices for themselves. Now, I agree that that might be harder for some than others. I mean, absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. I fast at least once a week because I don't wanna be obese, but I understand that for some people, that's just impossible because they don't have that amount of willpower, or it would take a lot more willpower for them than it does for me. I understand that. I understand that it is harder for some people than others, but to say that it is just not possible because, you're born this way, the conclusion would then be that you shouldn't exist, not that we should make accommodations
Right, for you,
infinite
yeah.
and forever for
Yeah.
you and all of your offspring. No,
The
absolutely.
irony is that's probably a less racist perspective than most people on the left. I Well, maybe we can transition into these other questions that I had, because this is kind of a good way to do that. So my audience is split between these pro-life Christians
Mm.
and secular pragmatists or pagans.
Mhm.
They got a lot of pagans that have a very realistic and unemotional view of reproduction, abortion, sterilization. You got into some hot water recently with Black Twitter. Damn. Black Twitter was so pissed about that sterilization tweet. And you also wrote a piece on why Republicans, aside from the moral issue, um, should support abortion, which was really fascinating. Uh, do you think that the pro-life position reduces the quality of a given nation or a population?
Um, yeah, absolutely. Especially the more extreme it is, the more it prevents all birth or all abortions from happening, the more it'll reduce the quality of a nation's genetic material because I think a lot of unwanted pregnancies happen because, these are people with low time preference who would rather enjoy themselves now than think about the future, people who have impulse control issues, people who I believe the most common reason for wanting an abortion at something like 45% is because of finances.
Finances,
They
yeah.
can't afford, they literally cannot afford to bring another child into the world and so should we really should we really moralize about that and say, well, if you should have thought about that before you had sex, you shouldn't have had unprotected sex. Well, we are where we are. We have a pregnant woman and she's trying to do the responsible thing after the fact. Now I know
Right.
it would have been better if she did something more responsible before getting pregnant, but here's reality. Here's where we are. So would you rather be on the hook for any kind of financial support that this child needs, knowing that perhaps this is not the best genetic material anyway? Or would you rather just let her take care of business?
I understand. I mean, I get this comment all the time, like why are you pro-life when some of these problems will work themselves out through a pro-choice perspective because it's mostly Black women having abortions. I'm pro-life because I think that we need to protect the vulnerable. But there is simply no denying the reality of the claims that you made in that article. It does reduce crime when you reach peak criminal age in the Black community. I think that's age 32, something like that. Crime goes down during periods of high abortion in the preceding 3 decades. So it's definitely if you're taking an evidence-based approach and you're not discussing the morality of the situation, I totally understand your perspective. But can this stance really be taken without addressing the morality of abortion?
I guess it just depends on your goal. Like if your goal is to talk about or philosophize about a utopia in which the most morally correct thing in your mind is our policy, then no, you can't talk about it without morality. But if you're sort of living in the real world and you understand that most people, actually even most religious groups, I looked at a recent Pew Research poll and it showed that every single major religious group besides evangelical Christians, a majority of them support abortion actually. So even in, I would say, the most pro-life groups, which is like I would say the religious groups, you don't see this ubiquitous pro-life stance anymore. And I think that's just a matter of pragmatism. It's also a matter of how much people want or don't want the government to be involved in that kind of decision.
I know. It's a tough stance to take as a conservative. But for religious reasons, I've got to be like, I'm pro-life.
Mhm.
I'm totally boxed in. Um, so I've read most of your Substack. I was just binge reading it last night, and you seem to respect intelligence inherent to certain communities. I don't want to mischaracterize you or put words in your mouth, so interject at any time. But you did this excellent article about Jewish rhetoric and how to
Mm.
combat that in discourse. But at the end, you did say that Jews dominate in terms of numbers of Nobel laureates, and because of their intelligence and contributions, they deserve our respect. is the converse true with respect to communities that have low IQ?
I mean, if I'm to be perfectly honest,
Yes.
it is harder to respect people who have lower IQ and suffer from the Dunning-Kruger effect, for
Yeah.
example. Like
Yeah.
they don't understand what they don't understand, and they wanna fight you on it all
Right.
day and night. I mean, that's how I became the Sisyphus of per capita. All of these people telling me that per capita was some kind of white supremacist, voodoo magic, just invented to make people look bad, you know, and it's like, no, it's just fractions. It's simple ratios. You can't compare two different size groups. It doesn't work. You have to do some basic arithmetic. Yeah.
That's
And so
too much to ask.
I mean, those 2 things combined, it's fine. I'm perfectly able to have tons of respect for people who are less intelligent if they realize their shortcomings and they wanna learn.
Right.
But that
Or if they
combination
don't have so many opinions.
right, sure, yeah. But that combination, I think, is, like, fatal to my
Oh, yeah.
respect anyway. It's just to not only be, I don't know, ignorant, less intelligent, but also insist in the face of all evidence that you're correct and be
Yeah.
unwilling to even consider that somebody might not be using voodoo magic to make you look bad.
The irony of projecting voodoo magic on you, a black person. It's like, "What are you doing?" No, I understand. I would much rather have a conversation with a IQ 85 person that knows they're dumb than an
Yep.
IQ 110 person that's totally entrenched in their worldview and opinions. They're so fucking annoying. Like Twitter, I know I need to stop, but I can't stop. God, I'm so angry all the time. But in that Substack also, so I did want to push back a little bit on this claim
Sure.
that you made regarding respecting intelligence within the Jewish community. Raw intelligence can be used for nefarious purposes.
Of course.
In that way, is it always a net positive?
No, I guess it's not, but
Ha ha! No, I understand what you're saying. Generally, it's good, but I'm like, especially with the high verbal IQ of the Jews and stuff, I'm like, you're not using this to benefit the world, people. So this isn't a trap. You can go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, that was, like, kind of the whole point of my article on Hasbara, which is, I think, roughly translatable to, like, convincing. Basically, you're trying to convince somebody that something is true or just sort of harangue them into silence.
Uh-huh.
Either way, you get the rhetorical win, and that's the goal. They don't care if you really believe or not, if you'll
Or the
just
truth. Yeah.
yeah, they don't care about the truth. They don't care whether you believe it or not. They just want you to either support them or shut the hell up,
Yeah.
you
Yeah. Yeah.
know? And I hate that. You know, I hate that so much.
Yeah.
What I care about is the truth, and that's why I wrote that. I was like, this all of the arguments about the Israel-Hamas war, they're getting me into the weeds and, "Oh,
Yeah.
this has nothing to do with the thing I brought up at all."
Mhm.
And it's
Yep.
all a really clever technique, but once you see
Yes.
it, you can't unsee it. Once
Oh,
you see
that
it,
article was
something's
so
like they're,
helpful.
like,
Yeah.
leading you into the weeds, they're trying to get you to talk about very general things, they're just anything to
Or
take your
obscure
attention.
historical stuff that
Oh,
they
yeah,
know you
yeah, yeah,
have.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they want you to have to read entire books, they want they want you to know the history backwards and forwards, they want you to have the
Right, right.
expertise of a military general. And no, you're just talking about this one incident, this one very specific incident where coordinates were given for aid trucks and Israel bombed those aid trucks anyways,
Yeah.
right? You don't need to know any of that background stuff. You
Mhm.
don't need to have a philosophy of overall how does Israel win this war. You don't need any of that to say,
Yep.
"Hey, this is bullshit and it's bad,
Yes.
and we
Yeah,
shouldn't
that's
be
exactly
paying
true.
US tax dollars to support
Mhm.
this."
Well, I think they're trying to demoralize people by making them feel stupid, or like
Mm.
I
Oh.
can't talk about this because I
Mhm.
just don't have all of the information,
Mhm.
and they're controlling the narrative in that way, which I think is really dangerous. I do have like a really stupid, superficial question, but I've been thinking about it for a really long
Sure.
time. So I see a lot of Jewish, Chinese especially, or other Asian pairings. Um, I've always found this so interesting because I'm like, you have supreme Chinese ethnicity and hair. Like, why are you doing this? Is this primarily the result of the communion of high intelligence, or is it more diabolical than that? They're actually trying to create a superhuman with the mathematical intelligence of Asians and the high verbal IQ of Jews, totally unencumbered by the moral scruples of Christianity and the Anglosphere. Is that it? I'm mostly joking, but I think that there's a kernel of truth to that. I think that this is like super eugenics, Jewgenics.
I think I think that would be quite a nefarious plot. But I mean, I think personally why this happens is the same reason assortative mating happens, that they just happen to be all going to the same fancy schools and ending up at the same fancy law firms or financial, you know, sector jobs or in
And it's
academia,
intelligence too.
whatever.
Like I heard
And yeah, and it's intelligence. Like if you've dated somebody who's a bit lower intelligence than you, then you know the pain. It's actually, I don't know about you, but I've experienced it as actual physical pain. Like this is on the daily. This hurts more than like an actual breakup. This is just like, oh,
Yeah, yeah.
well,
Because
what
it's
are you
not
doing?
like dealing with somebody that's malicious where maybe they
Right,
could change. It's like there's no potential there.
right.
You
Like
just there's nothing you can do about
you
it.
look
Yeah.
into their eyes and you just don't see, a fully human light in there.
And then you have to be like, "Well, I can't deal with this," you know?
Yeah. So but if that were a plot, like a Chinese Jewish mixing plot, I think they've fallen short on one thing though. It just I'm Chinese, so I can say this. Both of us, we're annoying people. We're extremely annoying. We're just charmless. Most of us are
Okay,
witless.
I thought
We're
immediately you were gonna
not
start talking
funny.
about
We're
penis.
not charming. We're kind of anxious and dweeby. And I think the Jews are, I mean, maybe that's why, like attracts like, maybe that's why this happens too, but it's just not, I mean, you need some riz, you need some charm in there.
Mm,
You can't just
yeah.
you know what I'm saying?
I
That's
don't know. The Chinese have a little bit of charm. The Jews are charmless, though. I just look at Billy Joel and I'm like, "This is the best you guys have to offer? Are you serious? What's going on
Yeah,
here?"
yeah, and, I don't think that these 2 groups are very cute either, like, we're not that cute, so together we're not gonna be that cute, so we really need some we need some help from outside forces.
I didn't say it. She said it, and
Yeah,
she
I
can
said
say
it,
that.
I said it, you know? I mean, I get called ugly, like, 100 times a day, and that's okay. It's
Why?
look,
You're
listen, I've
so
accepted this
cute.
about myself, it's okay. You can go ahead and think it's fine, go ahead.
No, and then there's all this, this Asian girl fetish. Have
Oh.
you've gotta weaponize that a little bit too, right? Your face is all symmetrical, you got, like, the cute little Asian thing going on. Man, I was in Japan when I was pregnant, I was, like, 23 weeks pregnant, and they
Mm.
were treating me like Godzilla, like, they
Really? What do you
oh,
mean?
yeah.
They're
People would
just,
be
like,
like, "Oh, you're so
excited.
big, so
Oh,
big."
really? They said that to you? Oh my
Yeah, a few people, but I was really big, and the Japanese, they're a
god.
dainty, beautiful people, they really are.
For sure.
I
I
I
have a hilarious story about along the same lines if you wanna hear it.
Of course.
I I was just in a Walmart once, and there are these Japanese tourists who, I think they saw, the giant bras that they have at Walmart. They're big enough to just, like, each cup is bigger than your whole face, right? So this adorable, tiny, tiny, petite little Japanese woman, she bent in half pointing at it, and she went, "Eh?" She was so shocked. She'd never seen a bra that size. I don't think they exist in Japan. And her
Yeah.
two friends were so embarrassed. They're like pulling her away, like, stop it, stop, come on, let's go. Right? They were speaking Japanese, so I don't know exactly what they were saying, but it's basically like, come on, stop that. You're so embarrassing, right? And then she walks a few steps, and then the next aisle, there's like an even bigger bra, and she does the same thing again.
Good. Yeah, we need more shaming. I live in Idaho and people here are so fat. I'm like, how did you even get that fat? How is it
Mhm.
even possible? You are making like 20 bad decisions every single day to get that fat. It's
Yeah.
just shocking. I didn't see any fat people in Japan, like not one. Or black people. It was truly awesome. It was just an amazing man. I
The
try
nice
not to weeb out, but I just it was the only country I've ever been to where I wasn't like, "Oh, I'd like to live here." I was like, "I want to be Japanese." And it
mm,
made me so sad. I'm like, "I'm never gonna be Japanese, ever."
mm.
And I've never been somewhere like that. I was like, "This place is awesome." Totally awesome. Um, I did wanna talk a little bit about, the articles that you did on systemic racism, which were really good too. Um, in one of your Substacks, you ask if systemic racism is equals worse outcomes, then Asians would not be able to achieve better outcomes than whites. Yet, they do. Do whites face more systemic racism in this country than Asians? Which, of course, we don't. The irony of the concept of systemic racism is that whites and Asians are facing actual systemic racism within universities and hiring
Mhm.
practices, yet still are producing superior outcomes to blacks. It does not seem possible to me that affirmative action programs and biased hiring practices will ever lead to the equality of outcome that the left desires because of inherent racial differences. So, how do you think this is going to play out in society? We've already seen some DEI related infrastructure collapses. I think the university system is going under. But do you have any other ideas about how you think this is going to end up?
Well, it is my sincere hope that this pushback turns into a wave of destruction and we can get rid of the whole
Yes.
DEI infrastructure bureaucracy, that
Right.
we can actually, whenever we hear the word equity, associate that with evil, feel a visceral disgust at the
Mhm.
concept. That's
Yes.
where I hope
Yes.
that we go as a society, and there are promising signals that that could be the case, because we're seeing things like, I don't know, just the fallout from DEI hiring from, I mean, it's not even just about race, it's about gender as well. Like, didn't the head of the Secret Service have to resign because they were,
Yes.
I mean, I guess for whatever reason, she allowed someone to get a shot in at, a presidential candidate.
Yes, and then Boeing, of course, has, major
Right,
DEI
right.
initiatives, and then that bridge collapse, that was chicks also.
Oh, was it? I didn't
Yeah.
even know
Female
that.
engineers. Why? Why
I
would you
have
do that?
a good friend who's a practicing doctor, and he said, "Diane, if you ever have like a serious medical condition, do not mess around with your life. Absolutely get an Asian doctor.
Yes.
Get an
Yeah.
Asian doctor, because that is the highest bar that anybody has to pass to get into med school, to get placed in their internships, all of that, the residencies. It's the Asians that have to pass the highest bar. So
Mhm.
you'll also see that in the stats around things like malpractice or complaints, that the Asians will have the lowest rates of messing up, basically. Um, because they did have to, I mean, that makes sense, right? If you had to pass a higher bar, you're probably going to be less likely to mess up.
Oh,
And,
yeah, of course.
if your life is on the line, do you want to take that risk, or will you just choose the Asian doctor?
Asian doctor every
Yeah,
time. I mean,
right,
why
right. And
would
so in that way, I think that these kinds of programs hurt the people that they're intended to help, because people will just automatically assume you're less, I mean, you're less capable because
Mhm.
you were let in on a lower standard. While
Mhm.
that may not be true for every single individual of a race that was favored, that stigma is gonna attach to every single person,
Of
and that's not
course, yeah.
fair, right?
Yeah.
I would
Mhm.
much rather personally, I would much rather there be a fewer number of women in, I don't know, aeronautical engineering than than to have, a lot of failures be blamed on women.
Mhm. Yeah, like, if I were a female that was at MIT right now and then I graduated on merit, I'd be so pissed off because
Right,
everybody my entire life would be like, "Mm."
exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why I've known women who got into both Caltech and MIT, and they chose Caltech because Caltech doesn't do that shit. No, no, I'm serious.
Isn't
And that's their
Caltech
policy, that's their official policy that they don't do any of that, um, diversity stuff.
but they're 1 and 2, right? It's MIT, then Caltech is really good.
I don't know what the rankings are, but I think that, like, when you're a woman or a minority that would normally get those, affirmative action, advantages, that you might be more likely to choose a school that doesn't do that because
Yeah.
then everyone knows, "Hey, well, Caltech doesn't do that, so we don't have to make any assumptions about her."
Right. I earned it. Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. I did have a few questions because you live in San Francisco,
Yes.
but, amongst my Asian friends, I I find them more resistant to conforming to socially popular opinions than
Mhm.
whites. I think that we're more sensitive to uh to being driven to opinions that we may not agree with just because there's social pressure.
Mhm.
You guys are hardier to criticism. I think it might be
Yeah.
because of your upbringings. I don't know, like the tiger mom thing. But I do not understand if it's not because of social pressure, why do so many Asians ally with Blacks and Mexicans with whom they have, like, virtually nothing in common?
I think that has to do with, um, the environment that they, experience at university, where that's sort of ubiquitous. And actually, I guess the people that they go to university with are normally a highly selected group as well. So what they see is not your average person of a different race, it's a highly selected subgroup. Of course, I mean, it's not the same standard that they got in on, but it's still not just the average person that you'll run into on the street, right?
Right. Right,
So,
that's
I think
true.
that's part of it, that's part of it, and then when they're told these things in sociology class about systemic racism, and they're kind of when you that's the thing that Asians are very susceptible to, is the authority of somebody
Ah,
who
yeah.
is your teacher, who is telling you, "This is a fact. These are facts." That's something that I think we're a little different on from at least us who were raised by immigrant parents. That's a little different from, white Americans, is that we are taught this deference to teachers that maybe is not as common with white children. Like, of course, you're taught to respect your teachers, but you're also taught that, you can question them and sometimes they're wrong and, their views might just be their views, right? Whereas we're taught that a teacher is sort of like a god and you're not supposed to really well, I mean, it's an exaggeration, but, I think it's a higher level of deference and a higher
Yeah.
level of just, like, assuming, "Okay, well, this person is a professional, they know what they're talking about, they know more than I do, I'm here to learn from them." And so you're more likely, I believe, as an Asian person who's grown up with this mindset, to just sort of take it at face value as the truth because you are told by a teacher who has that authority, who you've been taught is supposed to be correct.
That's really interesting. That didn't even occur to me because when I was formulating these questions, I was like, "Why is it?" And I sat there for a few minutes and I was like, it must be some part of Asian culture that I'm not understanding." That
That's
makes sense.
that's my guess because I think we are taught a lot more about, okay, you really have to very much respect your teacher because they know a lot more than you. You're there to
Mhm.
learn, blah, blah, blah.
That cuts both ways, though. I mean, that'll be a benefit when our government's functional. So when is this white Asian alliance coming? Round 2. Let's do it. Yeah.
It's here now. I believe in it. I believe in it. I think we have a lot of Gee, they wanted Asians to be part of this BIPOC alliance, but I just don't see it. I'm not seeing how that benefits us. So I would
Yeah.
much rather be allied with the white people because apparently they're the ones in power and apparently they're supreme, right? We keep being told about their supremacy, and it's like,
Yeah.
well, I mean, that's cool. Why wouldn't I want to side with I'm sorry, but why wouldn't I want to side with the supreme beings
Yeah, of
that are in
course.
charge of everything in this country? Like, why would I wanna side that I mean, am I suicidal? Am I trying to go up against the supreme beings of the country? Like, are you
Yeah.
stupid? Are you
Yeah,
are you
yeah.
trying to sell me on an alliance against them? Because no thanks.
I know. Well, we do have, so many overlapping interests, and we also have some overlapping problems as well. You wrote, a really interesting piece on the nature of genocide and whether white genocide is real, and I am going to piss a lot of people off, but I'm inclined to agree with you. I also don't wanna mischaracterize your position here, but, if a group is voluntarily engaging in their own demise, I'm not saying that's entirely their fault. I mean, we've been at the hands of, really clever propaganda for many, many decades now. Um, is it really genocide in the conventional sense? I mean, no, we're voluntarily reducing our birth rates, having abortions and everything like that. But this is also happening in Japan, South Korea, I think might have the lowest birth rate in the world. Is it like 0.7? It's very low.
It's very low, yeah. Japan and
Um,
South Korea, I'm not sure which one's lower, but they're pretty
they're
both
both they're
fairly
both pretty bad.
low. Mhm.
Which does suggest that it's not only propaganda, that it's multifactorial. What do you believe are the other variables contributing to low birth rate in wealthy countries?
I think in wealthier countries, they're just higher and higher expectations for each person's sort of quality of life or what they expect to have in their lives, and then they they sort of have to work longer hours or get more credentials or have jobs that are more demanding in order to keep up with these lifestyles, and they also have higher and higher expectations about what it is they need to provide for their children. They're looking at the costs of daycare and then the costs of private school and the costs of all these tutoring things, the cost of college. And I think a lot of people are just saying, well, the math doesn't work out. Or there are stats that bear this out. It's that people are putting off childbearing until
Yeah.
they're trying to be responsible, right? They want to get settled. They want to have a career. They want to be able to support this kid. They want to be able to give their kids a good life. And then by the time they get around to it, they find that fertility is dropped and they don't end up having as many children as they wanted to ideally.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. It's such a shame too. I mean, I don't know how we're gonna get the birth rate up. What do you think about that? Do you think it's gonna be government policies or I
So
mean,
far, I've not read or heard about any government policy that has been effective towards raising the birth rate.
what about
Um,
Hungary?
w I'm not familiar.
Well,
What
I don't actually know the data on how it's working out, but Viktor Orban, has I hope I'm not incorrect about this, but I think that you don't pay income tax if you have 4 or more
Oh, really?
children. Yeah, 4 or
Oh,
more
interesting.
children with, 2 citizens, and it has to be the same woman.
Okay.
Yeah. So you
Alright.
you can't just go around, like, knocking up,
Oh,
all
yeah.
these Hungarians. But I'm pretty sure you're free of
Nice.
income tax for life?
What?
Yeah.
No, I was gonna suggest that if your next question had been like, "What can we do to raise the birth rate?" I would have said that. I would have said that. If you have
Yeah.
4 kids, you are exempt from federal, state income taxes.
Oh, yeah,
That would
wouldn't that be
well, and
something? Yeah.
and and, you know, that would have the added effect of, getting the people who we want to reproducing, right?
Yeah,
Because
that's
we
true.
don't want people who are dependent on government aid to be reproducing, and they wouldn't
Mhm.
be for a tax benefit when they don't really pay that much in income tax.
Yeah. Yep, that's true. Are you familiar with RK selection theory?
Yes.
I've recently I've talked about this a lot in videos over the last few years, like back from my Stefan Molyneux era. But I've recently been informed by one of my friends that this has been broadly debunked. Do you know anything about this?
Oh, I didn't hear about that. Tell
Huh.
me
Well,
more.
I don't know. Edward Dutton apparently has debunked this, and I quite trust him.
Okay.
This was just an off the cuff question. I didn't know if you know anything about that, but I find it hard to believe that there's no merit in RK selection theory. It's obviously playing out in society, as you would expect. So like I'm less concerned about the birth rate, I think, than most other people because we have such high investment in children. And then I look at situations like, Black Hawk Down and stuff, and I'm like, how many competent white people equal X number of incompetent Black people? Like it has to be like 100 to 1. Like how worried are we really about about the birth rate? How much does it really matter? What do you think?
I personally I'm not familiar with an argument that is convincing about why we need the exact number of humans that we have right now. So, if the birth rate is low and it continues to be low and it never stabilizes, sure, yeah, we'll go extinct. But if the birth rate is low, but it stabilizes and we just have a lower population overall, I've not heard a really convincing argument about why that's a bad thing. Maybe fears about jobs that need filling and not enough laborers, not enough people
Yeah, but
picking up
what
food or
kind of
something like that.
jobs
I
are
don't
they?
know.
I mean,
I
the kind of jobs, of course, matters. Like, I'm not worried about manual
Right,
laborers and things like that.
right,
But you also have to think about like why is the birth rate low and what is the quality of people? Are they having high investment in the children that they do have? What kind of parents are they? What's their financial situation? Like the quality of the person produced. Um, is more important than the actual numbers. And I think that we're falling short on the right. People are like, well, we're getting replaced. I'm like, we're getting replaced in terms of numbers, but how much does that really matter?
right.
And of course matters to some degree. I don't want to be a minority in my own country. But everybody's really freaking out about it. People are like, you have to have like 9 children. I'm like, well, what about having 3 kids, but you're highly invested in all of them?
Yeah.
That's got to be a superior situation than having 9 kids that you can't handle or that are
Yes,
raising each other. And
absolutely. They're
I don't
turning
know.
into criminals or are
Yeah, it's my own cope though, because I only have 2 kids. So
you planning to have more?
I don't know. I'm 36 and my last pregnancy was rough. I'm like,
Yeah,
I don't want to do this again. But it's also a lot of work and it
yeah,
takes a toll on the human body. It's rough. So
yeah,
I definitely see both sides of this. And like I know people are highly vitriolic to women without children. Like I was getting this so much online before I had kids. It was just making me bitterly depressed. And I'm like, listen, you have to have certain things in your life lined up
right,
before you can have kids. And
right.
it's way more difficult to get those things done in your life now than it used to be. Like you used to meet somebody in school or at church or whatever. Your parents knew some people and there were all these people trying to get you together with somebody. But now the genders are just a disaster. You have to date online, which is just I met my husband on match.com. Um
Yeah.
and it was just like the number of bad dates with libtards that I had to go on and, like, listen to their stupid stories about, like, their ex-girlfriend that's a single mom or whatever. One time I went out with this guy who was making $250,000 a year. He asked me how much money I made, and he's like, "I cannot date a woman that doesn't make as much money as I do." I was
What?
like, "That's fucking insane. That's crazy. Like, I'm never gonna make that much money. Why would you?" He just was like, "I just won't be able to respect her or what." I'm like, "Why do you give a shit? Why do you care?" And people don't understand that, like, when you get into the dating market now, it's just so much more difficult to navigate these things. It's just a nightmare. So, like, what are young people supposed to do? Gen Z's checked out.
But they're
Their
not even having
memes,
sex, right?
they're
No,
they're
no,
pro
I can
virginity.
watch
Yeah,
TikToks for the rest of my life. I don't need
it's just it's just so hard. This is a major cultural problem, and I think the only thing that we can do is community building. I mean, I don't see another way.
I don't know. People can just talk shit on Twitter.
I do know a lot of couples that happened because they slid into the DMs of the other. Like,
On Twitter?
oh yeah, yeah. My best friend Robin Riley, I'm pretty sure that her husband slid into her DMs, and that's how that
Nice.
happened. But it happens all the time, and so I don't know. Maybe this is our community building.
Yeah, I encourage it.
Yeah, me too. Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot like that, but,
No, no.
I did not know your background. So, one last question. What is San Francisco like? What is it looking like these days? What's going on there? What have you seen in your life?
The things I've seen. Um, my neighborhood is very calm, and I like to describe it as sort of it's almost a suburb, but it's still it's in the city, but
Yeah.
it feels like a suburb because it's mostly families and old Russian and Asian people, and
Oh, nice.
yeah, it's great for food. And then so before we had all-door boarding on the bus, I don't know if you're familiar with that, but basically it's like you can get on at any door and nobody even looks at you and make sure you're paying the fare or whatever. Before
Cool.
no, not cool. I mean, cool in a high trust society, very
Yeah, yeah.
because you can just tag on and
Yeah,
it
yeah.
saves a lot of time. But in a place like San Francisco, that just means that you get everyone in your neighborhood as well. Whereas before all door boarding, we didn't get everyone because they couldn't pay the bus fare, right? So now,
Yeah.
like, at least it's only pockets, but we have people who are basically passed out drunk in the middle of the day. They just take over the bus shelter, and that's
Hey,
like
that's not fair. They're also on fentanyl.
they're on fentanyl, they're on meth, they're drunk, they hang out at the bus shelters like that's a bar or something.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, so you'll see, like, little old ladies with their groceries just standing 20 feet from the bus shelter because they have nowhere to sit down because these people are like, "Oh, yeah, this is my drug den now."
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I live
so,
here.
yeah, I see that, and then downtown, of course, there's a bustling market full of stolen goods, so, they sell everything. They steal everything, they sell everything. If you want cheap Legos for your kids for Christmas, they got you. You know?
Oh, man.
They have to lock the Legos now at Target too, because
Jeez, what a
anything with, like, a
disaster.
decent resale value, they'll steal to support their drug habits or whatever. But a lot of the city is still really beautiful, and,
Mhm.
the food here is amazing. So,
Yeah.
I guess there's good and bad, but I don't know. I'm hoping that things will turn around as more people are like, "No, enough of this shit." I'm
Yeah, yeah.
sorry about all the swearing.
Oh, it's okay. What do you think you've also written a few substacks about, what do they call homeless people now? I forgot the PC
Uh,
term.
the
Uh, the
unhoused neighbors.
unhoused?
Unhoused neighbors. Oh, they're your neighbors,
That's
because
retarded.
they
That's
set
just
up some
so stupid.
cardboard outside of your house,
And they're
and they're gonna set your house
unhoused.
on fire with their meth pipe, so now they're your neighbors.
How is that inherently less offensive than saying homeless? It's just
I
another way to say homeless. It's like the colored people and person of color. I'm like, it's the same thing.
It's the same thing. No, it's I think it's called linguistic shift, where the underlying situation is a very bad one, so no matter what you call it, it gains the stigma, the
Yeah.
undesirability of the underlying
Yeah.
situation,
So it doesn't really
and so
matter.
no matter
Yeah.
what you call it, it's gonna sound bad eventually, like unhoused neighbors,
Unhoused neighbors.
it's
Yeah.
the
Like
same
we're gonna
stigma,
buy that.
homeless
Um,
person.
but I've always thought that there was some pretty tight correlation with relinquishing these people from
Yeah.
institutions. And so like I think that there's some correlation there, but I'm not really sure how strong it is. And I was reading a lot of studies about how this is not super tightly correlated with the cost of housing, which was surprising. So I did not read your Substack about that, but could you elaborate that on that a little bit?
So there's an entire book called "Homelessness is a Housing Problem." I believe that's the title of the book, and basically they just ran a bunch of correlations between things like area homelessness rate and you know drug addiction rate or homelessness rate and weather, and their best correlation they found was between homelessness rate and housing prices. But I kind of that article, I tried to debunk that entire book, by saying that, this you should only really expect a correlation between homelessness and something like drug addiction if the
Mm,
homeless cannot move once they've
right.
become homeless, right? Or else they might just move to wherever the drugs are available cheap and they
Right.
won't get arrested for doing them.
Like
like San
Seattle.
Francisco,
Yeah.
like Seattle, like San Francisco, or they might just move somewhere where they can't be told, "Hey, no camping," like the
Mhm.
Ninth Circuit.
Yeah. And then these cities they're moving people around too.
Right.
Like, I moved to Seattle in 2014 and there were hardly well, there not I wanna say there were hardly any homeless, but it wasn't, so much of a problem that it was affecting my day-to-day life.
Mhm.
By, like, 2017, there were bums taking shits outside of my apartment. It was a disaster. Needles everywhere. And that was so it was some policy shift of decriminalization over
Mhm.
3 years that
Mhm.
clearly incentivized bums coming from other places to come into Seattle,
Right.
and I know that they were getting tickets, to get sent out there. I know I know that they were,
Of
or doing
course.
it voluntarily.
Of course. I mean, there are social workers who are basically on the record saying that they've recommended to homeless people in, smaller towns, "Hey, you should go to this larger town nearby because they have more services."
Mhm.
So, I mean, I think it's undeniable that having more services and spending more money on homeless services is going to attract people.
Yeah, of
Right?
course.
If you're told, "Hey, we're a small town, we don't actually have anything, but we can give you a bus ticket to the big town where they have lots of stuff,"
Like,
you'll probably
"Oh,
take that, right? Like, I mean,
yeah.
that's a no-brainer, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, of course."
Yeah.
This is such a huge problem. I mean, I think American cities are cooked. Are you always gonna stay in San Francisco?
I don't know, but I really like it here, I was born here, and, I
Mm.
mean, I think I'm just stubborn, but I kinda wanna stay and fight for it.
Well, there have to be some people that are staying and fighting for their towns, otherwise
Delusional people like me. I admit it, no, I admit it. People are
that's
telling me
good.
all the time, "Ah, you should just move to Texas." Like, yeah, but then I'll be in Texas.
Yeah,
No offense, Texas, but I've never lived there, I don't know much
it's
about
just so hot. I don't know how
Oh, hot,
people
yeah,
Oh, yeah. I don't wanna live in Texas either. I honestly don't wanna live in Idaho, but I couldn't live in Seattle anymore. I was like, "I can't have
fair
kids
enough.
here. This place sucks." But, now I just deal with the 7-month-long winters and
No, 7 months.
oh, it's brutal. Yeah,
You at least have a hot tub. Say you have a hot tub.
I do not. I do not have
Oh,
a hot tub.
well,
So if
you
you guys
deserve
wanna
one.
crowd fund my hot tub,
You deserve one.
I
7
do
months of winter is
I
hard.
deserve it.
Yes, you deserve it.
Check out my subscribe star, Blonde in the Belly of the Beast. Um, Diane Yap, it was so wonderful to have you on. Oh, I forgot the other joke. I was supposed to say per yapida.
Yes. Per
Damn.
yapida, per yapida.
I screwed everything up. I
No,
did.
not at all. That's
Check out her
wonderful.
Substack, Critical Rice Theory. Check her out on Twitter. Is there anywhere else that people can find you?
No, don't look for me in San Francisco. Don't beat me up, please.
And if you want to commit an anti-Asian hate crime, Diane Yap does live in San Francisco. You can drop your address in the live chat. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you, live chat, for joining us as well. And I will see you guys soon.
Thank you.
Oh, that was so fun. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Oh,
I
is the
really
stream still
enjoyed
going?
it.
Ah,